She carried water past his golden gate every single morning, never once looking up. He was a billionaire. She washed clothes for coins. So when he ordered his guards to bring her inside, the whole town whispered she was finished. Instead, he did something that left his own family speechless, and it all began with a torn photograph. To understand that morning, you have to go back to the beginning, to a girl named Nia and a road she had walked 1,000 times. Nia was 19, and she had no mother, no father, and no one in the whole city of Umweze who owed her a single kindness. Every dawn, before the roosters finished crying, she balanced a heavy clay pot of water on her head and walked the long red road that curved past the richest house any of them had ever seen. The gate of that house was painted gold, and behind it lived the Obi family, whose money touched every market, every bank, every big building in the town. Nia never looked up at that gate. She had learned long ago that when you are poor, looking up only invites trouble. But that morning, trouble found her anyway. Her sandal caught a stone, and the pot tipped, and a thin rope of water splashed across the polished stones in front of the golden gate. It was nothing, a puddle the sun would drink in 10 minutes. Yet the great gate opened, and out came a woman in a wrapper worth more than everything Nia owned. This was Madame Ngozi, the mother of the Obi house, and her eyes fell on the girl the way a hawk falls on a chick. "You," Madame Ngozi said. Her voice was calm, and calm from her was the most dangerous sound in that town. "You have dirtied my ground." "I am sorry, Ma." Her hands were already trembling around the empty pot. "It was only water. I will clean it." "Clean it?" Madame Ngozi laughed, and 2 of her housegirls laughed with her because they were paid to. "Look at you, bare feet, a dress with 3 colors of dirt, and you walk past my gate every day like you belong on this road." Nia's throat grew dry, but she kept her chin up. She would not cry in front of this woman. "This road is the only way to my customers, Ma. I wash clothes. I am not a thief." "Not yet," Madame Ngozi said softly, and something in the way she said it made Nia's stomach drop. By the time the neighbors began to gather, market women with baskets, a boy pushing a wheelbarrow, an old man who sold recharge cards on the corner, Madame Ngozi had already decided how the morning would end. She raised her voice so the whole road could hear. "From today, this girl is banned from passing my gate. Any of you who lets her use this road, you will answer to me." She turned to her guards. "If she comes again, chase her like a stray she is." The crowd murmured. Some looked at the ground. One woman lifted her phone and began to record, because in that town, another person's shame was free entertainment. Nia stood in the middle of it all, her legs shaking, the empty pot cold against her side, and she understood in that moment that she had just lost the only shortcut to the houses that fed her. Without that road, her walk would triple, her customers would find someone faster, and the small coins that kept her alive would dry up like the puddle at her feet. She did not beg. She picked up her pot, turned her back on the golden gate, and walked away with her head high, while a stranger's phone camera followed her the whole way. But what Nia did not know was that behind an upstairs window, a man had watched every second, and his hands were shaking harder than hers. That man was Kletchi Obi. He was the only son of the Obi house, 32 years old, and the true owner of the fortune his mother liked to wave in poor people's faces. In the boardrooms of the city, they called him the Quiet Lion, soft-spoken, patient, and impossible to fool. But that morning, standing at the window, the Quiet Lion could not breathe. It was not the girl's face that had stopped his heart. It was her pot. Painted on the side of that ordinary clay pot, faded but clear, was a small blue bird flying over a curved river. Kletchi had seen that exact bird before. He had been searching for it 11 years. He went down the stairs so fast his slippers slapped the marble. By the time he reached the gate, Nia was already a small figure at the bend of the road. "Bring her back," he told the head guard, a broad man named Tunde. "Now, do not frighten her. Just ask her to come." Tunde blinked. "Sir, your mother said—" "Bring her back," Kletchi said again, and this time even the guard heard the lion in it. So the whole road watched a strange thing happen. The billionaire's own guard ran after the water girl, and instead of chasing her away, he lowered his voice and asked her, politely, to please come to the house. The market women gasped, the boy with the wheelbarrow stopped pushing, and Chinello, Naya's oldest friend, who happened to be passing with a tray of oranges, dropped her tray in shock and did not even bend to pick up the fruit rolling into the gutter. "Naya," Chinello whispered when she caught up, breathless, gripping her friend's arm. "They are calling you inside. Do you know what people are saying? That you are finished. That woman will humiliate you in front of the whole house." Her eyes were wide, but there was something else in them too, something Naya was too frightened to notice. "Whatever happens in there, you must tell me everything, everything. Promise me?" "I promise," because Chinello was the only friend she had. She did not know yet that a promise given to the wrong person can become a rope around your neck. Inside the compound, the world was a different planet. There were fountains, there were cars that shone like black mirrors, and on the wide front steps stood Kletchi Obi himself, and beside him, arms folded like iron, stood Madame Ngozi, whose face had gone still as stone the moment she saw her son personally waiting for a gutter girl. "Kletchi," his mother said quietly, "what is the meaning of this?" "Mama, please," he said. And then he turned to Naya, and his voice changed completely. It became gentle. "Sister, forgive my mother, and forgive me for calling you back. I only want to ask you one question." He looked at the pot on her head as if it were made of gold. "This bird, this river, who painted it?" Naya's arms tightened around the pot. It was the only thing in the world that had come from her mother. "My mother painted it, before she died. She said it was our family mark. That is all I know." Kelechi's eyes filled with something between joy and grief, and he pressed his mouth to his hand for a long moment before he could speak again. "Then you will not carry water for coins another day. You will stay in this house, and you will be paid honest wages, and no one will ever chase you from this gate again." He turned to his mother, and the whole compound went silent. "She is under my protection now." Madame Ngozi did not shout. She simply looked at the pot, at the little blue bird, and the color drained from her face like water from a cracked cup. She had recognized the mark too, and in her eyes, if anyone had been brave enough to look, there was not anger, there was fear. That was the first thing nobody understood. Why would the richest woman in Umeedze be afraid of a painted bird on a poor girl's pot? The days that followed were the strangest of Naya's life. She was given a clean room, 3 meals, a soft bed she was almost afraid to sleep in. The staff did not know how to treat her. Some were kind, some whispered that she had bewitched the young master, but Kletchi treated her like a person, which was something no rich man had ever done. He asked about her childhood. He listened. He remembered small things she said, and slowly, carefully, like 2 people crossing a river on loose stones, they began to trust each other. One evening, she found him alone in the garden, staring at the sunset, and she gathered her courage. "Master Kletchi," she said, "why did you really bring me in? A man like you does not save a girl over a puddle of water." He was quiet for a long time. "Sit," he said. When she did, he told her about a boy he once knew, himself at 21, and a promise he had made to his dying father. "My father told me something the night before he passed. He said, 'We built this house on a debt, my son. One day, a bird over a river will fly back to our gate. When it does, do not run from it. Pay what we owe.'" He looked at her. "I have waited 11 years to understand those words, and then you walked past my gate with that bird over your head." Naya felt her heart pounding. "What debt? What did your family owe my mother?" "That," he said, "is what I am trying to find out, and I think my mother knows." His jaw tightened. "But she will die before she tells me." There was a small silence then, the kind that is not empty, but full. A night bird called somewhere beyond the wall. Naya looked down at her own rough hands, the hands of a girl who had scrubbed strangers' clothes since she was 10, and she felt something she had not felt in years. the feeling of being seen. You are the first rich person who ever asked me a question and waited for the answer, she said softly. Kletchi almost smiled. And you are the first person in this house who has ever told me the truth without wanting something from me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Two people from two different worlds sitting on the same stone bench. And Naya let herself believe, just for that moment, that the world might be kinder than it had ever been. She should not have let herself believe it, because that small, warm moment was the last piece she would know for a very long time. Neither of them saw the figure standing just beyond the garden wall, listening to every word. When the figure slipped away into the dark, it went straight to Madame Ngozi's private sitting room. And the figure was not a stranger. It was Chinello. For weeks, Naya had been telling her best friend everything, exactly as she had promised. Every kind word Kletchi spoke, every question he asked, every secret he shared in the garden. And every word had traveled from Chinello's lips straight into the ear of Madame Ngozi, who paid the orange seller well for each report. The one person Naya trusted most in the world had become the villain's eyes and ears. But that betrayal, terrible as it was only the beginning of what Madame Ngozi had planned. Because Madame Ngozi had realized something. Chasing the girl from the gate had not worked. Insults had not worked. Her son's heart was softening by the day, and a soft heart is a door left open. So she chose a new weapon, not words this time, but the girl's own reputation. It happened on a Sunday when the house was full of visitors. Madame Ngozi gathered the entire staff and half of her important guests in the wide sitting room, and then she announced, with tears she did not truly feel, that her late husband's gold bracelet, a family heirloom, had gone missing. "It disappeared," she said, dabbing her eyes, "the very week that girl entered this house." The room went cold. Everyone knew who that girl was. "Search the rooms," Madame Ngozi ordered. "All of them. I am a fair woman. Let us find the truth." Naya stood frozen as the guards moved toward her room. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, but she made herself stay still, because running looks like guilt. She watched a guard walk out of her room holding between two fingers the very gold bracelet pulled from inside her own folded clothes. The room exploded in whispers. A guest gasped and covered her mouth. Someone said, "I knew it," loud enough for all to hear. Phones came out, and Madame Ngozi turned to her son with a face of false sorrow. "You see, Kletchi, you brought a thief into our home. You defended a thief in front of the whole town." "I did not take it," Naya said. Her voice shook, but she did not let it break. She looked at each face in that room, at the guests turning away, at the staff who had shared meals with her now stepping back as if she carried a disease. "I have never touched that bracelet in my life. Someone put it there." "Of course someone put it there," Madame Ngozi said sweetly. "You." And here was the cruelest part, the part that made the injustice burn. 3 witnesses swore right then that Naya had seen near the master bedroom that morning. 3 people, paid or frightened, lied to her face while she stood there with her hands trembling and her throat closing, and nothing to defend herself with but the truth, which no one wanted. She heard the whispers rise like water. She saw a woman recording her shame for the internet. She felt her legs go weak beneath her. But she did not fall, and she did not beg. She stood tall in the center of that beautiful, cruel room, and she looked at Kletchi. And Kletchi, this was the knife. Kletchi said nothing. He was staring at her with a face full of confusion and hurt, torn between the girl he was coming to love and the mother he had trusted his whole life. His silence lasted only 3 seconds. But 3 seconds was long enough to break Naya's heart in half. She was told to leave the house before nightfall. The gate that had opened for her now closed behind her, and the whole road that had watched her go in now watched her come out, this time branded a thief. Janella was waiting at the bend of the road with open arms and wet eyes. My sister, what did they do to you?" she cried, holding Naya close. And Naya wept into her friend's shoulder, not knowing she was crying on the very shoulder that had sold her. That night, Naya had nothing again. No room, no wages, no name. Her reputation, the one thing a poor girl truly owns, was gone. She sat on the steps of a closed church with her mother's pot beside her. They had let her keep the pot because who wants a thief's clay? And she stared at the little blue bird in the moonlight and asked it the question that would not leave her. Why is that rich woman so afraid of you? She did not have to wait long for an answer, because a shadow was coming up the church steps toward her, and it belonged to the last person on earth she expected. It was Mama Neka. Mama Neka was the oldest woman in the Obi house, the head of the kitchen, a woman with a face like a locked door. She had been the very first to call Naya a thief the day of the spilled water, the one who had sniffed and said, "Gutter girl," louder than anyone. Naya braced herself for more cruelty. Instead, the old woman lowered herself onto the cold step, groaning, and for a long moment said nothing at all. "I owed your mother my life," Mama Neka finally said, "and I have spent 20 years being a coward about it." Naya turned so fast she almost knocked over the pot. "You knew my mother?" "I knew Adeaze," the old woman said, and hearing her mother's name in another mouth made Naya's eyes sting. Everyone in this town knew Adeaze once, before they were paid to forget her. She reached out and touched the painted bird on the pot with one shaking finger. "This mark, do you know what it is, child? It is not just a family sign, it was a company sign, a business. Adeaze drew it herself the day she and another young woman started a small trading business with nothing but borrowed money and stubborn hope." Mama Neka's voice dropped. "That business became the Obi fortune. Every naira in that house was built on your mother's back." Naya could not speak. The night felt like it was tilting. "The other young woman, the partner, she is the one you call Madame Ngozi." The pot nearly slipped from Naya's hands. They were partners? Best friends, almost sisters. The old woman's mouth twisted. But when the money grew big, something in Ngozi grew hungry. There were papers, child, a partnership agreement. Half of everything belonged to your mother. And when your mother fell sick and had no money for treatment, she went to her old friend for help, for her own half, her own money. And do you know what she did? Mama Neka's hands closed into fists on her knees. She told the whole town your mother was a mad woman making up lies. She hid the papers. She let your mother die poor in a one-room house while she wore the gold your mother had earned. And I, the old woman's voice cracked, I was a kitchen girl who saw it all and said nothing because I was afraid to lose my job. Naya was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because your mother did not die a fool," Mama Neka said. "She knew Ngozi would deny everything, so before she went, she made 2 copies of the partnership papers. She kept one." The old woman reached into her wrapper and pulled out something wrapped in old cloth, and she gave one to me to keep until her child came back to that gate carrying the bird. She pressed the cloth bundle into Naya's hands. "You came back, child. The bird flew home." Inside the cloth was a folded yellow document, and tucked against it, half of a torn photograph. Naya's breath caught. The photo showed 2 smiling young women standing arm in arm in front of a small market stall, and above the stall hung a hand-painted sign, a blue bird flying over a river. One of the women was her mother, young and beautiful and alive. The other half of the photo, the half that would have shown the second woman's face, was torn clean away. "Where is the rest of it?" Naya whispered. Mama Neka shook her head slowly. "That is the strange thing. Adeaze tore it herself before she died. She said, 'The day both halves come together, the truth will stand up and walk.' I never understood it." The old woman looked out into the dark. "But I always believed the young master had the other half. I have seen him searching this town for 11 years for something. Now I think I know what." And Naya remembered Kletchi in the garden, his father's dying words, "A bird over a river will fly back to our gate, pay what we owe." The father had known. The father had been trying from his deathbed to undo his wife's sin. And Kletchi had been unknowingly searching for Naya's family his whole adult life. That was the buried truth. The billionaire had not fallen for a stranger. He had spent 11 years looking for the very girl his mother had spent 20 years hiding. For the first time since the Golden Gate closed behind her, Naya felt something harder than fear rise in her chest. Not anger, something quieter and stronger. Determination. She was not a thief. She was an heir, and she was going to prove it. But proving it meant walking back into the lion's den, and Madame Ngozi was already 3 steps ahead. 2 mornings later, the sun rose gold over Umweze, and the great house of the Obi family opened its gates for the biggest event of the year, the Obi Foundation Gala, where Madame Ngozi handed out scholarships and checks to the poor while photographers snapped her generous smile for the newspapers. Hundreds of important people filled the wide front courtyard. Politicians in white agbada, businessmen in dark suits, church leaders, camera crews. And at the center of it all, on a raised platform beneath a banner of her own face, stood Madame Ngozi in flowing royal purple lace and heavy gold, queen of everything she had stolen. Then the crowd began to murmur, and heads turned toward the Golden Gate. Because walking through it, alone, was Naya. She wore the same faded dress she had been thrown out in, her feet bare on the polished stones, and balanced on her head, steady, proud, impossible to look away from, was the clay water pot with its small blue bird flying over a river. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked straight through that glittering crowd of suits and gold and cameras, a poor washergirl in a sea of wealth, her chin high and her eyes fixed on the woman on the platform. Every phone in that courtyard turned toward her. Every conversation died. And on the platform, Madame Ngozi's practiced smile froze on her face and slowly, slowly cracked. Because she knew that pot, and she knew that bird, and she knew that the dead do not always stay buried. That single frozen moment, the barefoot girl with the water pot standing tall before the towering gold-draped billionaire's mother, hundreds of stunned faces between them, was the picture the whole internet would share by nightfall. "Stop her!" Madame Ngozi's voice cut across the courtyard, sharp and high, the calm finally gone. "Guards, remove her!" The guards moved, but another voice stopped them cold. "No one touches her." It was Kletchi. He came down the front steps 2 at a time, and the crowd parted for him, and he walked until he stood between his mother and Naya. In his hand he held a small, old, torn photograph, the missing half. "Mama," Kletchi said, and his voice was dangerously quiet, "I have been carrying this half of a photograph since the night my father died. He begged me to find the other half. I never knew what it meant." He turned to Naya, and his eyes were wet. "May I?" Naya reached into her wrapper and drew out her mother's half. Her hands were steady now. In front of hundreds of witnesses and a dozen cameras, Kletchi Obi joined the 2 torn pieces together, and the courtyard gasped as one. Because the completed photograph showed 2 young women, arm in arm, smiling under a bird and river sign, and the second woman, the face that had been hidden for 20 years, the partner standing beside Naya's mother, was unmistakably a young Madame Ngozi. 2 partners, Kletchi said, loud enough for every camera to catch. A business built by 2 women. One of them, my mother told this entire town she had never met. And here is the partnership agreement. Half of everything my family owns was earned by a woman named Adaeze, this girl's mother, who died poor while we grew rich on her name. The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone in that courtyard had ever heard. Madame Ngozi's power crumbled in real time. Her hands began to tremble. She reached for the podium to steady herself and missed it. "Lies," she whispered, but the word had no strength left. "Those papers are forged. That photograph is fake." Her eyes darted across the crowd, searching for the faces that always agreed with her, and found only cameras. "Kletchi, my son, you would shame your own mother for a gutter." "Do not call her that word again," Kletchi said. And then Madame Ngozi did the thing that finished her. Cornered, panicking, certain she could still win the way she always had, she turned to the crowd and pointed at Mama Nenka. "That old woman is behind this. She has always hated me. Nenka, tell them the truth, or you are dismissed today. You will never work in this town again. I will see to it. Tell them you made this up." It was the same weapon she had always used, a threat to someone's livelihood, the tool that had silenced Mama Nenka for 20 years. But this time, the old woman did not shrink. "I am too old to be afraid of you anymore, Ngozi," Mama Nenka said, stepping forward, her voice ringing clear. "I watched you let your best friend die. I held her hand at the end, and I kept her papers for 20 years waiting for this exact day." She looked at the crowd. "Everything the young master has shown you is true. I will swear it before God and this whole town." The threat had failed, and in failing, in front of every camera in the city, Madame Ngozi had confessed with her own mouth. She had just tried to bully a witness into lying, which no innocent woman ever does. The businessmen were already backing away. The politicians who had come to be photographed with her were suddenly very interested in the exits. The church leaders bowed their heads. Her whole life had been built on being admired, and she watched the admiration drain from every face at once. And there was nothing, no gold, no gate, no guard that could buy it back. Here was the one moment the crowd almost understood her, almost, because Madame Ngozi sank down onto the steps of her own platform, the purple lace pooling around her, and she spoke in a small, broken voice that carried in the silence. "We had nothing, Ada and I. We were 2 hungry girls with borrowed money. When the wealth came, I could not go back to being nothing. I could not." Her shoulders shook. "When she got sick and asked for her half, I told myself she would recover and I would fix it. And then she did not recover, and it was easier to bury the truth than to face it." She looked up, and for one instant she was just a frightened girl who had made a monstrous choice. "I did not set out to be wicked. I only wanted to never be poor again." For a heartbeat, the courtyard was quiet with something like pity. And then Nia spoke, and the pity ended, because Nia reminded them all what the fear had cost. "My mother wanted the same thing, to never be poor again, but she chose to earn it. You chose to steal it, and then you let her die for it, and then you called her daughter a thief in front of this whole town." She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. "I understand your fear, Ma. I have been poor my whole life. I know that fear better than you ever did. But being afraid is not permission to be cruel. It never was." No one clapped. It was too heavy for clapping. But every head in that courtyard nodded slowly, and Madame Ngozi lowered her face into her hands, because the truest punishment had already arrived. Not handcuffs, not a courtroom, but the moment every single person she had ever tried to impress finally saw exactly who she was. The lawyers came in the following weeks. The partnership document was verified as real. The estate was divided the way it should have been divided 20 years before, and by law, half of the Obi fortune now belonged to the daughter of Ada. Madame Ngozi was not thrown in any cell. Nia asked that no charges be pressed, but she lost the only thing she had ever truly worshipped, her place at the top of the town's respect. She moved to a quiet house on the edge of the city, and when she walked through the market now, the whispering followed her the way it had once followed a barefoot girl with a water pot. That was justice enough. That was justice that fit the crime exactly. But Nia did something with her half of the fortune that no one predicted. She did not buy gold. She did not build a bigger gate. Instead, she took her mother's business mark, the blue bird flying over the river, and she put it on a building she raised on the very road where she had once been chased away. It was a school for girls with no mothers and no money, girls who carried water and washed clothes for coins. And beside it, she built a clean water station so that no girl in Umeeze would ever again have to walk 3 miles at dawn with a heavy pot on her head. Over the front door she hung the completed photograph, the 2 torn halves joined at last, so that everyone who entered would remember that the whole thing had begun with 2 hungry girls, a borrowed naira, and a painted bird. Both halves came together, Mama Neka said quietly at the opening, standing beside Nia in a fine new dress, retired at last and honored as the woman who had kept the truth alive. The truth stood up and walked. As for Kletchi, the quiet lion who had waited 11 years and defied his own mother for a girl he barely knew, he did not rush. He had learned that love built fast is love built on sand. He simply kept coming to the school, helping with the classrooms, sitting with Nia in the evenings the way he had that first time in the garden, until one day, the trust between them had grown so wide and so deep that neither of them could remember being afraid. He never once mentioned the fortune. He only ever spoke of her. And when he finally asked her to be his wife, he did it not at his golden gate, but at the water station, at dawn, on the very spot where she had spilled a pot of water and changed both their lives forever. Nia said yes. Not because he was a billionaire, but because he was the one man in that whole proud town who had looked at a poor girl carrying water and instead of looking away, had run down the stairs to find out who she really was. On their wedding morning, the guests whispered, but this time they whispered in wonder. And when the bride walked in, she carried, cradled in her arms like something holy, an old clay pot with a small blue bird flying over a river. She set it down at the front of the church where everyone could see it. Because a mother's love had painted that bird. A mother's love had torn that photograph in 2 and trusted that one day the halves would find each other. And a mother's love, long after she was gone, had reached across 20 years to lift her daughter from the dust of a red road all the way to the top of the Golden Gate, not as a servant, not as a thief, but as the rightful heir, who had been there, in plain sight, carrying water past that gate every single morning, all along.